Shalom. Welcome to the Chai Center and the Chai Academy. So the Chai Academy, once again, is a different classes of interest, primarily of Jewish subjects, things that affect Jews, things that affect Israel. But it's also, in the past, we discussed the ethical dilemmas and the like. Today's class, as advertised, we're going to talk about the Balfour Declaration versus the White Paper. So some unbelievable insights as to what happened. Now, this is clearly this is an important lesson in history, and so even though we never really started off as a history course, but some things fascinated me, and I think they will fascinate you too. So we'll begin with the Balfour Declaration. So the Balfour Declaration took place in November 1917. You have to realize, by the way, 1917 was probably one of the craziest years in since creation. I mean, there's so many things that happened in 1917. You're talking about World War One. You're talking about the revolution, communist revolution, Balfour Declaration. The Spanish flu had started. It culminated in 1918. It was a nutty. There's so much. Anyway, so November 1917 is something incredibly good happened to the Jewish people, and in fact, in 1,917 years, this was probably the happiest news they've ever gotten, and that was the Balfour Declaration. So basically, it was a document, it was from Britain. It was a document that on the idea that, you see, the British, let's just say this first, the British were on the cusp of conquering Palestine, a Roman name, conquering Palestine from the Turks. So it was just about to happen, right? They were on the verge, and it was so Britain, because they were at war, she committed herself basically to allow, and this is what the Balfour Declaration is, to allow parts of Palestine to become a Jewish state. The motivation was twofold. One, it was altruistic. Lord Arthur Balfour was a very good man. It was something that he wanted to do. We'll discuss him a little bit later. Something that he wanted to do. Lord Balfour. He eventually became the Prime Minister of England. You can read up on him. But the main motivation as why the British, the Parliament accepted it, because if they showed themselves to be strong Jewish allies, right, then they would be able to elicit the support of Jews in their war effort. I mean, there were a lot of Jews living in the world at the time, right? Many in the U.S. and less so in England, but they were looking for help to buy war bonds, etc. They felt that if they would do this, then they would actually gain Jewish support. So the idea was that Palestine, hey Susan, parts of Palestine will become a Jewish state. And so Lord Balfour, he was the one that wrote it up. It was passed by the cabinet, the British cabinet, and it was sent to a Jewish leader who was the head of the Federation of Zionism. It was Lord Rothschild, and basically the words were, and I have them written down here, it was, "We view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home. It was incredible, incredible news. Incredible news. Which means that the Jews would finally have a place they can hang their hat. Right? They can finally be able to call a place home instead of being at the mercy of one tyrant or another. So it was the best news ever. And it was accepted by the League of Nations, which was the precursor to the UN, in 1922. It's interesting, by the way, the League of Nations, they met in Queens. They met, I think, in Bayside, Queens, or somewhere there. That's where the League of Nations was. Now it's the UN, etc. Now, and the League of Nations, the reason why they adopted it, because they said, wow, this is now the rationale for Britain to be in Palestine. You see, when Britain conquered Palestine from the Turks, right, there was some opposition. What are you doing? You don't belong there. Who are you? Why are you there? The reign of Britain has come to an end. But here, when they made it it's also a Jewish state. So you need a referee. You need a referee. You need someone to be there to overlook, to make sure the shenanigans are not happening. So the League of Nations were very happy to have Britain in Palestine because it was a great rationale. Balfour himself, by the way, he made a comment. He made a comment, and he says that he's trying to make up for the embarrassment of what Christendom had done to the Jews. So he says, so if this Christian can atone for the sins of other Christians for the way they treated Jews, he says this is something he would like to do. Now, interesting to note is that he wasn't the only one. There were quite a few. There were quite a few members of cabinet at that time, in Balfour's time, in 1917, etc., that they were honorable people, and they had a soft heart to the suffering of the Jewish people, right? They did, and so he wasn't alone. He wasn't just a lone soldier. One of the things he said, and this is Balfour was quoted as saying, that he prided himself as the greatest thing that he can look back on in his life is the Balfour Declaration. And he was a prime minister. He was a member of the cabinet. He was a muckety-muck. But he said that this is what he prided himself on, that he was able to get the Balfour Declaration passed. And it's a little known thing about Balfour is that in 1939, right, the Balfour family, I think it was the Earl of Balfour III, or the third Earl of Balfour, or something like that, they donated his estate, I mean, he's a wealthy man, and his house to Jews as a training school for them to learn how to fight the Arab enemies. Right? So in England, they had this clandestine training camp, and it wasn't to fight. It was to fight the Arabs. It wasn't to fight the British, but it was able to fight to make sure the immigration is happening. Right? So Balfour intended for Israel to happen, a Jewish state, call it whatever you want, to happen. Fast forward a few years, and it was May 17th, 1939. It was middle of the war against Hitler. It's a world war now. The one of the most heinous things happened to the Jewish people. If you want to put Hitler on one side, that was the most heinous thing. But definitely in modern history, aside from Hitler, one of the most heinous things. So it's the middle of the war. Everybody's busy. People are they're building tanks, they're building munitions, they're drafting and they're training, etc. The British Parliament, in all their busyness to conquer Hitler, in their unending venom for the Jewish people, they did something which was a betrayal. A betrayal. The Jewish people worldwide were betrayed. And basically, they called it the White Paper. The White Paper was one of the worst things it's one of the greatest betrayals ever, and it's a betrayal that had significant loss of life. Basically, what with the White Paper, there was a change of heart clearly in the new cabinet, and as you'll hear, and what they did was they and by the way, it wasn't only just a betrayal. It wasn't only just a betrayal. What it was also was a message to Hitler that we don't care about the Jews. We're not going to be concerned. You fight us, you fight us. You fight the Jews, it's not our concern. What the White Paper was, and what the message to Hitler was, that Palestine, because the Brits ruled it, Palestine will only allow 75,000 Jews in over a period of 5 years. Right? So slightly more than 15,000 per year. That's the quota. So Palestine, which is now Eretz Israel. Britain said you can only allow 75,000 people, right? In 5 years. After 5 years, then more can come in if the Arabs acquiesce to this. If the Arabs say no, then the borders are shut. But for now, because it's during the war, we'll allow 75,000. Now, we know how many people were killed in the war. How many Jews? We know there were a minimum of 6 million. Right? So for you to allow a 6 million over a period of from 41 to 45, can you imagine those borders were open? Can you imagine the Balfour Declaration stood fast and the White Paper was never drawn? Right? How many lives could have been saved? But the British, in their most unqualified manner, and they drew up this White Paper, and only 16,000 Jews per year over a period of 5 years. Then only thereafter, only if the Arabs acquiesce. And it was basically a death blow to the Jewish people, right? And so basically, whereas the Balfour Declaration said that the British government is adopting a policy that there should be a Jewish state in Palestine, the White Paper was a complete reversal. The White Paper was that it's not our policy or our interest, and these were the words that were written there, that Palestine should become a Jewish home. Right? Churchill tried to fight it. Churchill in the cabinet, there was 40 members in this cabinet. Right? And Churchill had only one other vote with him to argue against the White Paper. So that means 38 human beings, if you can call them that, had decided the fate of millions of Jews. And Churchill was a good man, but he couldn't. There was a vote. It's a democratic country, and he only had one other supporter. I'm not sure who that was, by the way, but only had one other supporter in order to stop the White Paper from becoming part of Britain's policy. So when they did that, basically all ships that were trying to make their way into Palestine were rejected. And they knew they were going to be rejected because, quickly 15, 16,000 quota fills up in the year. And it was a terrible thing. There was a famous story. It was called the Struma. It was a ship that had 760 or 770 Jewish passengers on board, and it got stuck. It got stuck. The engine died in the Turkish border, in the border of the country Turkey, right? And when it was there, so Turkey said, "You can't come in here. We're not letting you in here." Right? Turkey's pretty close to Israel, right? But Turkey said, "No, we're not letting you in here. Go to Israel." Right? Um, and so the Jews begged the British, Jews from all over the world, whoever had a little bit of political clout, begged the British, take this ship, the Struma. Okay, right now it's in no man's land. Turkey won't let it in. They can't live forever on a ship, and the British said no. So after 2 months of this stinking ship living on the border of Turkey, Turkey towed it to the sea, where it sunk, and only 2 people survived. Only 2 people. So there were 769 passengers, 767 perished, and 2 survived. And nobody, and they were so fierce. The Brits, the British Army and the British policy was so fierce that they would not let Jews in. And so Susan writes that people moved to Israel to fight. There was a whole underground movement from all over to fight the British, right? But I think it was Ben Gurion who said, he says, we shall fight against Hitler despite the British, and we shall fight against the British despite Hitler. What a comment that was. He put them in the same, right? That one country would exterminate them, and the other country wouldn't save them. That was the feeling of the time. So there was basically a war against the British. If you can read Elie Wiesel's book Night, it's a sad story about a murder of a British officer, but they didn't want to kill the British officer per se. They wanted a lesson and that's why Menachem Begin blew up the King David Hotel. Right? That's why he blew it up. It was with all officers, just like, by the way, Israel today, they give the heads up that we're going to blow, right? So they gave them the heads up, and Israel does that today. So they blew up the King David Hotel because the policy was perfidious. The policy reeked. It was anti-Semitic, and it was kowtowing to the local, to the Arabs, and probably oil, and it was just it was a corrupt, and, as I said, perfidious policy. And people started to fight the British, and they came from all over. Now there's one formal group that formed that was called the Lehi, right? And the Lehi group, you can read up on that. Lekhi is how you can read it up, I think, in probably Wikipedia or whatever. And the purpose of the Lehi was, and they were not successful. I mean, they destroyed many German posts, etc. But they by the way, and Britain kept on sending soldiers from England to Palestine to fight the Jews. It was so warped, right? Just to fight the Jews, to fight the people that were dying. It's just mind-boggling that it happened. So the Lehi, they wrote in their manifesto that their purpose is to dismantle the British army in Palestine. Right? That was their purpose, is to get rid of the Britain's occupation of Palestine and get them out. Now, in the end, Britain did leave, but that was because of the United Nations. But Lehi did it by violence, right? and and now, but here's why people were against Lehi. First of all, violence, violence, violence. To me, I'm very torn. Somebody killed my people, right? And so while I wouldn't go after innocents, but I would, I very angry at brass, right? Um, Give me a second. So they tried to dismantle. Now here's the problem: if they would have been successful, and they would have gotten the Brits right in 1939, 1940, 1941 out of Israel, they would have had a greater problem. Is that if the Brits were out, right, um, Hitler would have come in, right? Hitler would have come in um, and taken over Palestine. So the Brits did serve that purpose. Is that Hitler didn't want to fight the Brits on two continents. But the Lehi did inflict, in fact, a lot of damage. And the Balfour Declaration is so basically if someone asks what happened to the Balfour Declaration, essentially it was rescinded. It was rescinded, and we'll talk more about Balfour because he had a very good relationship with the Chaim Weizmann. We'll talk about him another time. But so there were a few good people, and there were a lot of bad eggs. I think that's the summation of this very sordid story. But they had untrained teenagers and young adults who basically their job, if they joined Lehi, was to bomb railroad stations, to bomb army posts, and they weren't soldiers. They were just so appalled that Britain could do what they did. So appalled. And it is a blight, quite frankly. It's a blight on British history. It really is. And I remember I was born in London, England, and I remember going to Israel as a 14 or 15-year-old. And so this is 1970s, 80s, 79, etc. And I remember when I was there and had a guide, etc. The guide was talking about how bad the British were, and here I was with a British passport, a British subject, a loyal subject, right? Committed to the crown, etc. I was not happy at that moment of time to be associated with Britain while visiting Israel. So there you have it. So the white paper trumped the Balfour Declaration, but it all came to a crashing end anyway when the UN voted the partition. And the UN could have done a lot more for the Jewish people, even though what they did was incredible, and it was unsure whether it was going to pass. But they could have made it a lot cleaner than they did, and we could have had less deaths. So our history don't come easy. Our history don't come cheap. What it does, however, it produces very strong people because of the history, because of the evolution of what we've been through. Very strong people in order to survive, and not just to survive, but to succeed. So that's what we have going for us, is that we persevere. So many other people. Where's the Third Reich now? Right? Where's the Third Reich now? So it's in a museum. Just what Hitler wanted to do to the Jewish people. They're in a museum. And it helped us. It culled the herd and made us just very, very strong people. We stand up. We want to succeed, and we haven't lost our because you would think you would be so cynical that we wouldn't want to help anybody, but yet Um, we're Jewish, and we help as much as we can at, to whomever we can. Right? Even enemies. You remember the tsunami in Indonesia. So Israel said, we're coming to help, and they declined the help. But Israel was there to help. That's who we are. That's who we are as a people. So we can forgive, but we cannot forget.